entitled this plenary session address, Going Public with an Intentional Redevelopment Congregation, Key Factors for Success, Characteristics of Church, and the Emerging Culture. And I think that came out of a telephone conversation that Arnold and I had last fall while I was standing outside of a Wendy's in eastern Tennessee on the phone. Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Well, you never know what you're saying.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'd like to build on what Charles started last night in naming the way that he gets in touch with the passion of God by asking the question, what breaks the heart of God? And carry that forward and share with you why I appear the way I do in the world, very briefly. The easy way to do that is to name for you the mission that I carry around in me that has been evolving in me over 28 years of ordained life. And here's how I say most recently. I live to serve the Spirit in all of creation by being a powerful, compassionate, courageous, playful, outrageous, and provocative midwife to the Spirit's life and joy that are longing to be birthed in this moment. That's what I aspire to. That's what motivates me. And I'm always looking at situations these days in this new role of 20 months and considering options as though I were investing my own money in them. And I can't tell you how transformative that has been for me. To say, when we're thinking about a new ministry, what would I need to know about this new ministry or the redevelopment of an existing ministry if it were my $500,000 that we were investing or pledging to invest over the next several years? And I invite you to think about it that way as well. Think about it being your money, and what would you want to know? How would you want to engage with the possibilities if you were investing your own money? And the reason I think that's been helpful is because actually what we're considering is investing something a whole lot more irreplaceable than our own money, and that is our own time and life. And so part of my passion emerges from this. The key word is that provocative midwife. Being a midwife. You'll hear that theme recur here. The launching pad for my own sense of vision came to me 13 months ago when I went to the UK for a month, a whole month. I was really, really privileged to spend 4 weeks with leaders of the Church of England's Fresh Expressions movement. And everywhere I went, when I had written this out, I had it printed up on cards. I had one question for everybody, because I felt that if we would pay attention to what they were presently learning, it might give us some insight into the learnings that we're facing today in our America. Here's the question. If you knew 20 years ago what you know now about the impact of secularism on the relationship of the church to culture and vice versa, how might you have prepared the institution differently for those emerging realities? Does that make sense, that question? Do I need to say it again? So if you knew 20 years ago what you know now about the relationship of the church to culture and the way that's impacted by encroaching secularism, which are undermining the assumptions that go into the work that we hold in common, how might you have prepared the institution, the church, differently for those emerging realities? I asked 70-some people, bishops, clergy, lay leaders, innovators, traditionalists, Anglo-Catholics, and evangelicals, and 42 of them said, yes, you can record my answers. So sometimes digitally I recorded them, sometimes I wrote them down, I filled up a notebook. And what I heard from them covered 3 major areas. First one was, they said 20 years ago, we were unintentionally pushing out the young leaders from our public discourse in the church. In other words, we were shoving out the prophetic voices in our midst. We began that at least 20 years ago. So we didn't pay attention to their prophetic images of what we were being called to as an institution, or as an organized expression of Christ's church on this earth. But we were also neglecting the formation of the kinds of communities that it takes to listen a prophet into their ministry. If you believe what Herman Hesse says in his little book, Journey to the East, at least as we have it translated today, he has a little claim in there that says, it is the hearers that make the prophet. And so these leaders unwittingly were saying, well, 20 years ago, we stopped tending the kinds of communities that it takes to listen to prophets' voice into being. And as a result, we lost touch with the growing gulf, the gap between the internal culture of the institutional church and the external culture we're called to serve. Now, you may not necessarily appreciate the way I'm trying to compare their learnings with ours, and you may not say that they're directly related to our learnings, but I'd like to say in just broad brush strokes, general, sort of capturing what we might learn from them if we choose to, and you may have other sources for the same learning. Because they neglected the prophetic ministry in their midst, and because they neglected the kind of community that made it possible to nurture the prophetic voice in their midst, they became self-congratulatory, self-referential, and they're struggling today, much like we are, with what I would call institutional narcissism. Somebody said earlier, we're really hard on ourselves as a church. Yeah, we are in self-pitying kinds of ways, but I'm not sure that we are necessarily in terms of challenging our relationship to the world that God loves so much. I don't think we're paying much attention to that. And this three-part answer is what has lent me a sense of passion. Because if I were to place my ministry and my passion in the context of all the work that the church does, I feel very, very called to advocate for the prophetic leaders in our midst. And I'm not talking about people in their 20s and 30s. This is the full range. We have them, but we've essentially silenced them. And I would like to talk about why.